Okay, all right. Well, in the interest of time, let's get going and kick off the final session of the day. And a great session it is. We are delighted to be having Walt Carter, the Chief Digital and Information Officer from Homestar Financial, deliver us a case study today. So Walt is going to be walking us through a session all around attribute-based access control. Actually, essentially the data fabric solution journey that he has taken at Homestar Financial to enable greater data access and permission. So quite a cool in-depth session for us. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Walt. But before I do that, so I just wanted to remind everyone again to please leave session feedback for Walt at the end of this. And obviously we do want to have a little bit of Q&A. So please utilize that Q&A feature and ask Walt any questions you may have. Enough from me. I've been doing enough talking to all of you over the past 3 days, and I know you're here to hear Walt speak. So I'm going to hand over to Walt right now and let him do the talking. Walt, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys today. I've plugged into several of the sessions over the conference so far. And I think this session will build on some of those others. Let me see if I can remember how to share my screen with you guys. And so today we're going to talk about what I've been doing to try to figure out how to solve some problems at Homestar Financial Corp. So let's just go straight into the presentation, if you will. And let me tell you a little bit about the situation report from April of 2018. So I walked into this job at that time and found that I had a fast-growing regional mortgage lender, that was in 21 states at the time. Now we're in 25. But prior to my arrival, for the 2 years before, there had been several failed software implementation attempts. I don't know how to describe them, any more kindly than that. And a couple of them were noteworthy. One in particular was a BI tool set that they had tried to implement and really spent a lot of time, a lot of money trying to figure out how to make that work and couldn't get it off the ground. And it was really that one, probably more than some of the others, that spurred the CEO to bring in, a CIO and really make a change there. What I also found when I got there was a lot of critical systems kind of scattered all over the place. And I know we're going to talk about, more cloud and data things, particularly on tomorrow's session. But I will tell you that, I've got several key systems like Salesforce in the Salesforce cloud. Our loan origination system from Encompass is a hybrid, actually. And then, we've got several things that are on-prem. And then we have what is essentially a private cloud. And so, I've got a borrower portal that lives in AWS, email that, lives on-prem and in Azure. In Office 365. And so again, you've just got, kind of your stuff all over the place, so to speak. When you think about the tools that you use to manage all of that, what I also found when I got there was a lot of really great tools, but partially implemented tools, not fully thought through, and even in some cases, not even, fulfilled on the configuration side of implementation. It's like they had started, got a little bit into it, realized that, it really wasn't working the way they thought it would. And so they just kind of bailed on the implementation. So I've got these really expensive, very, very nice tools in place to manage what they had in place, but, and what they had intended to bring online. So with that said, I'm going to tell you that I was looking ahead also, as I was told that everything was solid gold, in great shape, and ready to scale. And turns out that wasn't the case. I don't know if you guys have ever been in that situation where it wasn't quite what they told you when you were on your way in, but that was certainly what I found. And so with the statement in mind that everything was solid gold and ready to scale, I was actually leaning forward into the future, thinking about things like GDPR, the California rule. New York is a close follower to California, Massachusetts. And again, I'm just thinking, I've got to do some prep work here to get in position for all of that. And I've got to consider these things that, that I'm going to show you here on the next slide. So, you know, we're in the loan business and we have a loan life cycle, and there's a workflow of how we move loans, you know, all the way through that life cycle. And then within that workflow, there's a data capture or data flow. And then, you know, you've got to have security from A to Z, and you got to think about the user experience. The user experience turns out to be pretty important. And I actually have said, as a kind of a specialist in mortgage, if you will, this is my third mortgage company as the CIO. I believe that those who do the best job at user experience, particularly with the borrower experience, are going to be the winners in the mortgage industry. And those that fail to conform to the rising borrower expectations are going to kind of be kicked off to the side of the curb. As you look at, you know, the acronym at number 5, FUSE is an acronym. I'm ex-military, ex-Air Force, aim high for all you guys out there in the field. FUSE just is a helpful guide for me as I look at software or solutions and implementations. Does it have the functionality that I need? Do I have the usability that I need? Do I have the sustainability or support that I need? And do I have the ability to ride it into the future, or the extensibility that I need? And so I always evaluate, you know, everything that I'm looking at in terms of those kinds of aspects. When I was in that quest and still thinking everything was pretty solid, I got to attend a particular session with the Georgia CIO Leadership Association, and we were looking at solutions companies that were largely coming from the Atlanta Technology Development Center. We have an incubator here in Atlanta that you know, some really great companies have come from, and then we also have this program that that relies heavily on the ATDC here in Georgia, and that's the Coca-Cola Bridge program. And there's a lot of really great companies that access that bridge program. And if you get through the vetting to be an incubated firm at ATDC, and an even harsher vetting, if you will, with the Coca-Cola Bridge program, then I feel like you've pretty much been through your paces. And so at the presentation that I saw that day, I saw a slide that looked like this, and it had some interesting things in it, like ABAC and data river, not data lake, not data ocean, not data pond, not data ditch, data river. And I thought, man, that's pretty interesting. I wonder what that ABAC thing is. And so I spent a little bit of time going to meet with Tyler Johnson. Tyler is the patent holder for the PrivOps matrix, and the CTO at PrivOps. And so the more I got under the hood with what PrivOps could do for me, the more I was willing to take the risk to lean into a startup and really look hard at, you know, maybe this could help me leapfrog some of those painful implementations, get into a position where we could show value very quickly around, you know, a couple of major components. So now let me stop for just a second and tell you that it was about at the beginning of this conversation with Tyler and trying to understand these concepts that I found out that, you know, everything wasn't solid gold, and that I had some real challenges in the infrastructure that I needed to remediate before I could, you know, even begin to think about doing attribute-based access control. One of those most noteworthily was, you know, my Active Directory problem. We had an on-prem Active Directory that really had not been maintained at all very well for several years. And where you go in and you look in the field that says employee ID, you didn't find anything. But later in an ad hoc field that was added in, you found the employee ID. So that tells you a little bit right there, if you're familiar with Active Directory, about how things might get some kinks in the hoses of your system. So so with that said, I'm going to go go ahead and expose a little bit more about PrivOps, because there's some great ideas that are built into this patent. On this slide, one of the things that you'll see is the PVC pipes. And PVC pipes are kind of all over the place and widely available, non-proprietary, as it says on the slide picture. And it's just a way for you to very quickly mass produce water pipelines. What Tyler did was he said, I wonder if we could do those same kind of things with data. If data is oil or data is currency. I've seen all of those references in the last few years, just like all you guys have. And he said, well, how could you manage that? Where are your control valves? Where's your ability to, basically add in extra capacity, manage the flow through the main pipes and the minor pipes. And if you look over to the picture on the right-hand side, he says, and I've got to add in some data analytics. I've got to look at, my cloud infrastructure. Maybe there's some RPA stuff going on. So the goal here is to be cloud native, open source, and non-proprietary. And those were all really good words in my mind. It may not be with you, but with me, they were resonating. And so, I started, looking again, okay, so there's a little bit more to this analogy that seems to work pretty well. Standardized parts for building water pipelines, repository of standardized reusable objects for building data pipelines. And there's the red button over there, the policy button. That turns out to be a pretty important button. And you're going to see some upcoming slides here that are actually pretty ugly and not at all pretty like some of the ones that James Morrison had in his presentation this morning. But let's just keep grinding through this. There's a white paper that I saw back in 2008 on indirect integration that I think was by a gentleman named Jeffrey Ricker. And over the years, I've kind of held that in my head. And I've seen over and over again, as many of you have, the legacy debt or the technology debt, sometimes referred to as the giant hairball. And so I've thought my way through over the years, how do I prevent that giant hairball from happening at the companies that I work for? And one of those ways is with that notion of indirect integration. When you start looking at indirect integration, what you start to see then is, there's a way of thinking about this, and it looks like my slides have jumped forward. So let me see if I can figure out how to back that up a little bit.
Just press your arrow back, you should be fine there.
Well, you know what? Let's just keep pushing. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. The notion is pretty standard, though. It's right. If you directly wire everything together, you get a giant hairball. And if you indirectly wire things in a sophisticated way, you get a much more manageable set of interfaces and a much more secure way to quickly segment or to quarantine. And so just kind of hold that in the back of your mind as we explore the rest of the matrix here. So if you look at the slide that's showing on the screen right now, you see the data source, you see a data transformation, filter, and prep layer, you see some standardized data, metadata, you see another transformation, filter, and prep, and then you finally see a data consumer. So you've got a data pipeline that's defined. Over on the right-hand side of that screen, what you'll see, again, is a model. And so for instance, some of the things that you might see is the data source is Salesforce. A data source might be my accounting package, might be my payroll system, might be my HRIS system. I can put almost any data set that I want into the matrix and start to manage it, just like we manage a service bus in a lot of ways. identity and access management tools, Okta, Active Directory could be one of those, right? And then, I use a tool called ThoughtSpot for data analytics. It's a next-gen tool that is really pretty remarkable. I am actually using UiPath and doing some robotic process automation as well, particularly to support my operations team right now. And so all of those things start to fabric in, and then I've got to manage the fabric as I lay the fabric across all of those data sets and all of those systems and all of those management tools. And then I kind of want to keep in mind, and keep a log of what's going on. And so this logging and the ability to plug in, and this is a future case for me. I'm not doing anything with blockchain currently, but it's something that's interesting to me. So what Tyler's done is he defined an information factory. And I think this is a remarkable thing in a lot of ways. So let me see if I can advance the slides again. Here we go. And the other thing, this is a slide that I saw way back at the beginning as well. It said, Walt, we can actually do lean and agile with data integration, and we can do really, really quick sprints to connect all these dots, maximize our reuse, minimize our rework. And this is kind of a generic slide, so I'm gonna move very quickly past this. But I will say this: it caught my attention, right? Faster and cheaper. And then the obvious question from our old triad is, well, can I do a good job and get quality out of that? If I've chosen fast and cheap, can I get quality? So here's what I'm actually doing. This is the ABAC physical architecture that we've put in place, and it's all riding on virtual machines. And so, as you look at my payroll system, my HRIS system is Paycom. And what we're doing is we're essentially using Paycom to drive the org structure. And we have now a very well probed org chart that comes out of this is in the form of a JSON file. And what we're doing with it is we're basically looking at who you are, where you are, what equipment you're on, and how you're coming in to our network and coming at the data with your request. And then, another piece that I think is really remarkable is what you see up there in the Meta DNA Catalog. Now, Meta DNA is different than metadata. Metadata basically says, here's something to tell you what this data is. Meta DNA, just like it sounds, tells you not only what it is, but where it came from and what permissions you have. And probably most remarkable of all for ABAC is what permissions does the requester have to get into this data set, not just what do we have the ability to share legally with regard to things like GDPR and the California rule and whatnot. The real challenge is protecting the data and making sure that people have the right credentials, can get to the data. But it's not just the credentials anymore. Now that COVID has hit and we're 100% remote, everybody's working all over the place anyway. And even before that, like I said, we were at 21 states. Now we're in 25. I've got 93 branches. I've got about 700 folks that are remote all the time, trying to get access to systems behind my firewalls. And as James said earlier today, I would have answered the question the same way. Yeah, everything on my network is secure. I've got some next-gen firewalls, FortiGate, Fortinets. I'm doing some really cool stuff there to make sure that, if you're inside, I'm secure. But what if everybody's outside? How do I know what to authorize for you and how to authorize you properly? We've had spoofers, I'm sure you guys have as well, that send the email in the name of your CFO or your president and say, hey, I'm in Nigeria temporarily, and I need you to wire me some money. And it's kind of a common legendary thing, and we had a spoof email like that probably about 2 years ago, and we've really tightened down a lot of things to prevent some things from happening that are bad. But one of the things that we wished for at the time was, well, Wes is not in Nigeria. There's no way that he would ever send this. Why would he be dialing in from an IP in Nigeria. I wonder if we should de-escalate his privileges. I wonder if we could throttle, his access, because again, he's got credentials, and it could be Wes, but could we validate that? What else could we do? What other attributes could we look at that would help us understand that? So you go through this chart and you see all of the systems represented in the clouds over here. You see Azure on-prem and Azure in the cloud. And so, again, I'm looking at how can I start to look at that policy layer, query my HR data, make sure that I've got a current org chart, and I can do that on the fly almost immediately. And then, measure those attributes to see what access should I grant, if any. And there's always the opportunity to not grant any access based on, a lack of fulfillment of the attributes. So I hate this picture in a lot of ways, so I'm not going to keep it up, but we can come back to it if you guys want to talk about it. Let's get into, more of this, workflow, if you will. And I think this is a good way to look at what we're talking about here. Is you see, how we're actually pulling this off. And I'm not going to read the slide. I'm just going to let it sit there for a little while so you can, cogitate on it. And if you need to move my face out of the way so you can see parts of it, that's fine. The real goal here, like I said, was to take a look at, where am I getting the call from? And then how do I respond to that? And I'm going to measure some things along the way to see what is actually realizable here. And, and again, I'm trying to do this in real time to optimize that user experience. I don't want this to take forever. It's got to happen really, really fast. And I've got to be able to start to manage this and log it, right? And that I want to learn as I go. So the logging is pretty important to me. It's actually pretty simple when you just look at the swim lanes, right? There's not a lot of swim lanes here, and there's not a lot of complicated code. I guess I should have told you guys up front that this tool set is actually built on Cassandra, Apache Cassandra. And I think that was in one of the first slides I showed, but I didn't call it out. There's some Node.js and some Angular on the front end on the console. But it's mostly Cassandra. Cassandra is what's under Facebook and Twitter, and it's a pretty well-established, proven open source platform with tremendous capabilities. And so that latency that I'm trying to avoid is really managed in the architecture of Cassandra, not so much in what we're doing with the patented pieces of code that make up PrivOps. So just to be clear about that. I'm gonna push forward. I feel like I'm taking too much time here. The other thing was we have a dynamic organization. I don't know if you guys do, but we've got a lot of movement of people that are currently our employees that have credentials and access, but they might change to a different branch. They might move to a different role within a branch. They might move to the ops center. They might move to headquarters. And so I need to be able to keep up with that dynamic content. I also, you don't see it here in the picture, but I use Okta for multi-factor and for single sign-on. And one of the things that we really wanted to do was continuously simplify the user experience, but add security as we did that. And so by using, the Active Directory integration with Okta, having Paycom as our HRIS system drive the initial establishment of credentials and authorization or access authorization and rights, then I could start to manage that, as we move forward in time in a dynamic organization. And so anytime that employee changes roles, we go back through and we basically respin that whole policy layer around the new role on the fly. And that's one of the most amazing things about this ABAC solution from PrivOps is it lets me do that instamagically on the fly. And so as the call comes in, I can validate that employee is in fact in that role in the moment, as long as my HR team does a good job of managing the input on the change at the beginning of the life cycle and through any updates, adds or deletes. This is also something that we're doing to automate more of our onboarding and take a lot of the load off of establishing credentials in multiple systems as we move through that new employee or that change employee. It also helps dramatically, as you might expect, if we've terminated an employee or a contractor and we want to slam access, we only have to go to one place to do that now. And as soon as that's done, that access is effectively eliminated. And so that's been, you know, a really great blessing here. I will say this, Jason, I hate the fact that we're not live in front of an audience because I can't see any faces and I can't see any of the interactions here. So at some point in the future, we might have to pull everybody into a room and do this over. But yeah. I'm going to show you just a couple more slides, guys, and then we'll go into our Q&A and give you guys an opportunity to probe me a little bit with regard to what I've done and what I'm thinking about going into for the future. The gold mine, and I think I heard James say this, and I'm pretty sure Scott said it at the session at the beginning of the day, is not necessarily just controlling access to your network. It's really, you know, the data that we live and die by. You know, when the data goes out and the data you know, winds up in the wrong hands and they use it, you know, for the wrong purposes, you know, that's when we have to declare a breach, is when we know that has happened. And so the data access, data management, that all drives your data pipeline. And so again, looking at multi-level security access, you start pulling these pieces together and start understanding holistically. You know, it's not just the nets and the subnets and the systems and the databases. It's really that dynamic data pipeline, and that's what we're trying to establish control over, so that we can understand what is changing, if anything. You know, what is interrupting. Where are the weaknesses in our provisioning of data to the people on our team that actually need it and have authorization to get it. This graph really shows, you know, again, that same request and response, and it gives you a better idea of what's going on in the Metadata DNA Catalog down at the bottom, right? So I'm looking at application policies, I'm looking at network policies, I'm looking at my security policies, you know, and as you see that flow on the bottom line, you know, I'm looking at, do I have data that's unmasked? Do I have data that's masked or encrypted? What is the metadata about that? How do I know? And again, I have so much more capability with this Metadata DNA Catalog than I ever did by just looking at the metadata, that, you know, it's really helpful. And again, I'm starting to look at some of the future here with machine learning. I can start to move some of this into a machine learning neural net and start to apply different policies at a much more granular layer, I think, later. And so that's something that's in the future for me. When I also look at, you know, looking at the data maps and the filters on the data sets, I'm looking at a lot of different factors here, and I need to be able to do that quickly in order to provision correctly. And so again, I'm looking at the timeliness of the transaction, the call and the response has got to be super short. And then I've got to be able to fulfill appropriately. And where I can't fulfill appropriately, I've got to have the proper messaging going back to that user who's requesting, explaining why I'm not giving them what they've asked for the way they've asked for it. And that's a little dicier than you might think. And we can talk about that later too. I've got, I think, just a couple more things. You know, I mentioned early on, one of the other things that I saw at the beginning with the conversation with Tyler was this notion of a just-in-time data lake or a virtual lake, and he calls it the data river. And I kind of like that analogy a lot, because it says, you know, I can put my foot in the river, but I can never exactly touch the same water the same way. Even if I pull out and put in over and over again, that water's moving. And so as I'm going through this river analogy, I'm going, yeah, and that's really what's going on for me too. I very rarely have static data in my loan life cycle. And I can explain that to you this way. As I begin the process at the top of the funnel, I'm collecting information about my borrowers, and frankly, it's all the information that, you know, an identity theft is looking for. It's everything in the world that an identity thief would want is actually in our closing pack, because I've accessed your tax returns, I've looked at your employee pay stubs, I've looked at your driver's license, have a copy of it, I've got your social security number, I've got your credit, I've got everything that an identity thief would need, all in one place. Back when we used to deliver all of those documents to the closing table in courier packs, the bad guys would pay a courier $10,000 to pop the seal off that courier bag and copy all of that information, because they knew it was a gold mine. And $10,000 seems like a lot of money if you're riding a bike delivering packages, but to the guy that's actually paying out the money, it's insignificant in terms of what kind of yield you can get from having access to that identity. We know that, the bad guys know that, and our borrowers are starting to figure that out. And so again, my goal is to try to create a very secure place for them to transact, with guarantees that I can control that information and stop the bad guys from ever popping the virtual seal on the digital information that's flowing all across the world. So this data river continues to build as we collect more and more information about the borrower, the borrowers, the properties. We also have the stakeholders that are off to the side that we don't normally think of, but you guys will appreciate this. I have a B2C business and a B2B business in the mortgage industry, because a lot of my referrals come from realtors and builders. And so I've got to protect all of their information as well. And all of that, again, could be a gold mine for somebody that gets a hold of it the wrong way. So I'm looking at a building set of data as I build your loan file and get you to the closing table. Once you close the loan, you would think, well, maybe that's a place, Walt, where you don't have to be so careful anymore. You just stick all that static data now on a closed loan into deep storage and never look at it again. But the regulatory environment says, no, Walt, you have to manage that data for 7 years from the last transaction on the loan. So if you service the loan as well, which we do, then that could be on a 30-year note, a 37-year obligation to manage the data. Well, during the time that we're servicing the loan, we could actually have moved that loan from one industrial investor to another. That's actually how we cash flow our business, is we actually move loans into pools, and then we sell those loans as pools into an industrial investor. Most of them are big retirement accounts that are looking for a steady collateralized secured income. And so you can see the volatility could happen when you move the loan from one pool to another. If you have a default on the loan and you have to buy it back from the investor out of the pool, again, all of those changes are changes that are happening to what we just said might have been static data, but it's not. It's really, again, it's the river's moving more slowly, I will grant you, but it's still moving all the way through. And even until the last payment on the loan is made to the servicer on a 30-year note, I'm still moving the data around on that loan. So again, this data river analogy really works for what we're doing in the mortgage industry. Probably works for almost everybody in fin services because it's the same kind of product set across the way. So as I looked at the picture here of the data river, and I'm looking at what can you do with these kinds of notions and these ideas, and then what kind of tools can you use to use for analysis and deeper study, then again you've got a lot of opportunity here. So it looks like it's 4:20-ish, and we're going till 4:30. I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions and answers, and so hopefully I've done that. So Jason, do we have anybody that's still paying attention and has a question?
We do. Lou Pellicori has been pretty active in the Q&A, and he's stepped up to the plate once again. So he's asked, is the Metadata DNA Catalog proprietary? How long did it take to implement the end-to-end architecture you were showing us?
Yeah, so the DNA catalog is proprietary. The Apache Cassandra is not, but the catalog itself is proprietary. And it's patented. So that was one of the other checkpoints, by the way, for me was, not only had Tyler gotten into ATDC, not only had Tyler gotten, all the way through the Coke program, he also had a patent on the Metadata DNA Catalog. One other thing I should tell you about Tyler Johnson is that for 7 years, I think, he was the VMware practice lead at Rackspace. And he said to me that one of the reasons he built this is because he needed this tool set at Rackspace for all of his customers that were moving information or workload from one cloud to another cloud. And, he could never really get the Rackspace guys to build it out for him while he was there. So he quit his job and he built it himself. The last thing I'll tell you in answer to the question about how long did it take. So once we got started on our project to get into place, it's taken me right at 6 months to get to a point where I can turn ABAC on. Now, I haven't gone all the way to the data river piece, which I'm about to explore as phase 2 of my project. And I'll also tell you, I haven't spent a fortune on this. This is one of the benefits of working with a startup is they're really hungry. And so I've been able to do some things there financially to help them, not take advantage of them in any way, but at the same time, get a real, early adopter kind of discount. And so I'm not authorized to tell you guys what I've spent, but it's really surprisingly little compared to what you could spend on other, big company tools that are better established, but they also take a lot longer to implement and they're a lot harder to configure. Hope that answers your question, Leo. Lou.
Another question is, well, how large is the IT team and or the team responsible to build the solution?
So it's also surprisingly small. Again, a lot of the coding, Tyler still does himself. We did reach out to some friends of his and mine to build some of the console and refine some things there. Because once this is done, my team has to manage it. So I've got a small group of 5 guys that are working with Tyler that are really concentrating on our integration with the APIs from Paycom, also over into Azure. I've had to spend a lot of time essentially rebuilding the Active Directory in Azure from the on-prem version, trying to clean up some of that mess there as we go. So some of what we're doing, just to be real clear, is addressing the legacy problem and not really a part of the PrivOps implementation, if you will. And so it gets a little dicey because it's all connected, but just need to understand some of what I'm doing there with my team is really cleaning up stuff that should have been clean already before we started this. So hope that helps clear that up.
Yep. Another question here is, what were the top 3 challenges, organizational, governance, and technical, and costs?
Well, I would tell you that one of the most surprising things was when we started looking at, the org structure from the HRIS system, we found, a fairly large number of anomalies. We've got a company that's been, really growing for about 18, 19 years. And a lot of people that have been in the company for many, many of those years have changed roles several times. And so sometimes if you had really bad practices in your Active Directory and your employee management infrastructure, you get that. So we found, people that, said they were reporting into a particular branch and everybody said, oh, no, that's not how that works. And then we'd have, 3 or 4 layers of misalignment in that. And, we spent a lot of time working with our HR team to clean up the org chart. That was one of the first big things, because you can't really do attribute-based access control if you don't have the org chart right to begin with. We also had multiple people in Active Directory that had multiple roles within the company. And again, now I'm not cleaning up HR now, I'm cleaning up Active Directory, and I'm going, well, how did that happen? Obviously it happened because the easiest thing to do is just leave them in their old role while they transition, and then nobody ever came back and cleaned that up. And so, okay, that's bad. We can't let that go forward, so we're gonna have to go back and fix it. And so we did. Culturally, one of the other interesting sidebars is, we have implemented ThoughtSpot as a BI tool after the failure of another tool set that's pretty prominent in the industry, so I won't name them. But I'm not convinced it was the software implementer or the software itself that was the problem. I'm actually more convinced now that it was our team that just didn't know how to do that. But we were able to get ThoughtSpot in and start getting the company using data in a really cool way. ThoughtSpot, for those of you that don't know about it, is what I consider to be a next step beyond Tableau, Click, and Domo, those kinds of presentation layer tools. For those, you have to understand the underlying data sets and how the data joins. For ThoughtSpot, you can be an idiot like me and just know how to write a Google query, and for my brothers and sisters in Microsoft land, a Bing query. And if you can do that, you can query the data yourself and you can start to pull it in. This creates another problem for us, though, in that I don't want everybody in the company to see all the data that's possible in a tool like that. So I need to almost get down to a field level sometimes with what I can show or not show, the masked or the unmasked that you saw in one of the previous slides. And so again, just thinking your way through your governance model, really critical to make sure you have that pretty well baked in your mind. And then just like our military op plans that never survive first contact with the enemy, your governance plan probably won't survive first contact with what you actually look at when you turn it on. So you got to be prepared to make the adjustments. And if you haven't thought through what the guiding principles and models of your governance plan are, you're not going to be able to make those adjustments very fluidly. And you're going to want to be able to make them very quickly to get things right and restore, to get the data moving through the pipes to the right people at the right time for the right reasons. So I can't stress enough that governance model, and particularly the principles and the models that you build, really need to be pretty well defined, because you're going to want to reflect on that as you make the adjustments and encounter reality. Hopefully that answered that question.
Excellent, excellent. And then we have one final question we can squeeze in from audience member Dan. Could this approach be classified as an implementation of sophisticated middleware in essence?
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Jason?
Yeah, could this approach be classified as an implementation of sophisticated middleware in essence?
Well, the only thing I balk at is the word sophisticated, because it's actually, when you look at the architecture, and just like what I showed you on the slides, it's really not that complicated. It's not complex. It really is as simple as, a river may have multiple currents operating, kind of at the same time in the same body of water. So if you've ever gone whitewater rafting, for instance, you start to understand the little eddies and the jets and the, those kinds of things that happen on a river. Same thing's happening in your data as it's moving through your organization dynamically. And it's going to, stagnate in a couple of places, and it's going to pool in others, and then it's going to rocket through some of these other channels. So as you start to think of it that way in that analogy, I think, the simplification of the architecture to this level really makes it a lot easier for us to manage. And then, I would say, again, we tightened up on some of the presentation layer of the console, the management tool for the PrivOps matrix itself, just to make that cleaner and more simple for my guys to take on it. I don't have any doubt that Tyler understands it, inside and out, but my guys didn't get it right off the bat. And so I said, let's see if we can simplify and rationalize this down a little bit more, so we know exactly what we're doing. And so yeah. And one of the other things that I'll share with you guys is Tyler's, really hot after some really big contracts with the U.S. Air Force under the SBIR program. And it looks like, a number of those are going to come through here in short order. And I'm an ex-Air Force officer, and I spent a little bit of time with him in some of those presentations. They're very excited about this quote unquote middleware, because it lets you do some real-time information sharing in ways that the military has wanted to do for a long time. So I'll just kind of leave that there. And again, I would encourage you guys, if you see my slide here, you can reach out to me directly through any of those mechanisms. I would encourage you, if you sat through this long, go ahead and link into me. And if you've got other questions or you'd like an introduction to Tyler or any of this content, I'm more than happy to provide that for those of you that came in here. And Jason, I think we're over our time. So thank you, sir. Appreciate the opportunity to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Walt. A virtual round of applause goes to you as well. Certainly an extremely thorough project, and looks like you're really kind of experienced the fruits of your labor now as well. So thank you very much for sharing that with us and going through that in so much detail. And thank you to all of you who took the time to hear Walt speak and let him talk us through this project. That essentially brings us to the end of day 3.